big week in golf. Weekend just gone, Curtis Cup won by the US, Bud Cauley winning in Canada, and some really notable performances from Matt Fitzpatrick, Victor Hovland. A few players kind of up there, you kind of go, that's had a bit of a precursor this week, but it is Shinnecock US Open week, and that's something that we can all look forward to. I think for us on this side of the pond, the time zone makes it a little easier to watch being East Coast, but just such a classic US Open venue. It's going to be tough. The fairways seem to be a bit wider this week, but if you miss them, there's some thick rough. So, there's very traditional in that respect. However, it's going to be one of those you can be on the fairway and have a horrible angle into a green. So you might kind of feel like you're going to be able, got all the questions from before, you might feel like you're going to be in with a chance if you're on the fairway, but actually, if you're coming in from the wrong side, wave goodbye to holding the green. So I think it could be a really fascinating one. So obviously Fitzpatrick, Victor Hovland playing really well coming into it, but the focus is going to be, I think a lot of the focus will be on short game. Strokes gained on the greens. You've got Sam Burns, who's ranked right up there. Harris English ranked right up there. See Fitzpatrick coming into form. He's got that kind of scrambling kind of game. I don't think the massively high ball flight is going to be such a key around Shinnecock, but it's just the ultimate test. Your patience and your entire game. It's just I think one of those courses where just can't wait to get going again. See, recent times, Brooks Koepka winning there last time, Tommy Fleetwood having a 63 in the last round and nearly snatching it. I think emotively for us Brits, we'd love Tommy to get over the line. He's sort of there or thereabouts at the moment. But I think a fascinating stern test. Can't wait to get watching it. But seeing as we're now on, I'll get straight on to the questions that came in earlier. So I'm going to go back on James's phone to some that we screenshotted from a previous stream. So going to start off with Ian Murgatroyd's Evening Boss. Does a driver have a finite number of shots in it before it starts to lose performance? That interesting one. Ultimately, the answer has to be yes. But for most of us, mere mortals, it's an awful lot of shots. So something like the long driving guys, that in principle, their drivers have about 500 shots till they reach their peak. But shortly after they reach their peak in terms of flexibility of face, they break. Now that's for long drive players who are hitting at 140, 150, 160 mile an hour club speeds. For most of us, not an issue. The only thing that I would give a word of caution to is if you've got a clubhead speed over 105 miles an hour, 110 plus, don't hit many range balls because the construction of the range balls is different to the ones that we actually play with. It loads the face differently. So your face will fail quicker if you hit lots of range balls if you have high speed. So avoid that. But realistically, yes, over time, the club will play in a little bit and it does get very slightly faster for a titanium face. And the composite faces and the TaylorMade shouldn't have that same effect. But realistically, unless you're high speed, you're unlikely to get to the point of making the face fail. So if you're someone who hits it 250 or less, unless you're very unlucky with the face, should be absolutely fine for the life of the club. But say avoid hitting range balls where you can. The first cut, is there stability gains going from GT3 to QI4D Core? GT3 is great on good days, but it gets a bit off on toe strikes. Is the fade weight configuration on QI4D for face rotation or for strike location? So I'll go to the last bit first. Actually, the toe weighting, it moves the center of gravity more out to the toe. So moves the sweet spot a little bit more toe side of center. So what it doesn't necessarily do is it doesn't hang the face open particularly, but what you are going to do is minimize any gearing on a toe strike. So the more you can move the center of gravity towards your strike point, the less distortion around that strike point you get, and therefore the less gearing. If you had a heavy heel weighted club and hit it massively out on the toe, you get more distortion around that CG point on a toe strike, and then it gears more draw spin. So you're going to lose more spin performance on a heel weighted club on a toe strike, which is why you'd move that weighting out into the toe to minimize that right-left gearing and hold that shot line as much as possible. But it doesn't mean the face is going to hang massively open. In terms of stability gains, yeah, GT3 could get a little low spin out the toe. So in principle, 4D has been pretty good for ball speed retention out the toe. But because of being able to load the toe up from a weight point of view, then it's a little bit more moderate than some TaylorMades have been in the past for a toe strike. So yes, I would expect you to see a little bit of a stability gain going from GT3 into 4 QI4D Core. Even in the GT3, you can move that weight out on the toe. 4D, you can move the weight back as well and go heavy front and back in the toe side to give a little bit more stability. So there will be a bit of an uplift in stability there, should retain just a little bit more spin. And there's a follow-on, no need to hit them, but from a design perspective, could it compare Dynamic Gold Mid 115X to KBS Tour 120 Stiff? So both actually use the tip section a little bit. The main differential is that the KBS Tours are designed to be a little higher launching and more moderate spin, whereas the Dynamic Gold Mids are designed to launch and spin a little bit more. Now, granted, it's going to be very, very minimal in that respect. From a launch and spin point of view, you're not going to get a shaft, steel shaft in particular, that's going to dramatically change those numbers. But the one thing you will find is the Dynamic Gold Mid will swing more tip heavy. KBS Tour is more of a upper mid balance point. So depending on your delivery, one shaft or other will suit your timing noticeably better than the other. But from a flight point of view, design-wise, in theory, Dynamic Gold Mid higher spin, and KBS Tour a little lower spin, but ultimately unlikely to see big differences between the two. Greg Sweet, good evening, watching here from New Zealand. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's probably very early morning with you, I would imagine. So thank you very much for getting up. And Richard Galfin, I love the show. Could you give some thoughts on the Ping IDI driving iron of the Ping Tour chrome shaft in my driver? Do you think that would transfer well to the IDI? Not necessarily. I think it's one of those hybrids and drivers are very different. These shaft-wise can be very different animals. And being a driving iron, the only thing with the Tour Chrome is it's a little bit back-weighted. It's very stable, but you might find that you just lose a bit of feel for the club head. So that would be one thing, one kind of note of caution with that, I think, as it doesn't necessarily track. You might want that as a driving iron setup a little closer to your iron spec. So quite often we'll use, if someone's in, for example, a Modus 120 in an iron, in their main body of iron set, we'll often go something like a Modus 105 in the driving iron. So it keeps it swinging more similarly, but you just lose a little bit of dead weight. So that would just be one thing on shaft-wise to consider with the driving iron. But the IDI, from a design point of view, very, very stable. It's a flat, strong hitting club. So strong for spin, pretty good for ball speed. It's got, essentially it's got an airbag on the middle of it. So the lightest thing out there is air. And so actually, if you can kind of, by using an airbag, fill and support the face, go a little bit thinner on the face, get more ball speed, that's a lot of the design elements to the IDI head. But strong, just not, it's a little bit clickier sounding than some of the other ones. But actually, from a ball speed point of view, very good, but can bring the spin actually a little low spin for some players. So that would be the only thing to be wary of, but very forgiving and very strong off the face. I'll hand James his phone back now. Thank you very much. Ooh. Right. So thank you for sticking with us whilst we got through those. And now on to the ones that have come through on this stream now. So ZB Rogan, good evening, how are you? How will matching my irons to the same MOI affect my swing weight progression compared to a standard swing weight match? So swing weight matching is static balancing. So it's something that gives a base point, but doesn't actually, if you have a 4-iron at D2 and a 9-iron at D2, then they're statically balanced, but you're not swinging the 9-iron with the same energy and effort and acceleration ratio as you are the 4-iron. Therefore, the same swing weight swings light in the shorter irons, or heavy in the longer iron, depending which way you look at it. So MOI matching is, in principle, meaning that you're keeping the energy to move the club the same across all the clubs. There is one little flaw in that, is that you don't put the same energy into every single club. You actually put a bit more effort and acceleration in as you go up the set, it gets more amplified. So actually, MOI matching is also slightly off as well. But with MOI matching, it's roughly speaking, it is about a half a point every club in terms of swing rate progression, which is quite strong. So actually, kind of tone it down slightly. We use what generally we call a kind of common sense MOI matching, in that it's a half a point every other club. So you tend to find fully MOI matched can swing a little light in the longer irons, a little heavy in the shorter irons, but static swing weighting is heavy in the long irons, light in the short irons. And at some point in the set, they'll both be spot on in principle. So MOI matching takes into account the movement of the club, but it only takes into account the movement of one club and not actually that it progresses up and down the set. So it still uses a lot more science than swing weight matching, what you could say, but it still has its little bit of little bit of foibles, and that also assumes that every single club has the same, has zero tolerances in terms of dead weight and balance points. So to truly match a set is a case of going through every individual club and just making sure that it matches your timings. Having said that, that doesn't really fit as a process into any kind of volume setup. So hence that middle ground of a common sense MOI matching is your best kind of overall, we feel, the best overall way of building. But if you have the time and the playing standard to dial in every single club with tiny little bits of lead tape and fine tuning, that's the optimal way of doing it. Because you get tolerances in, they make thousands of shafts a day, and you're going to get tolerances in dead weight and balance point. Tiny ones, but they're still there. JBL8802, evening gents. Do you have the Line Q white driver shaft available? If so, could you hit it and give your thoughts? Would it be similar to the Tensei white? We do, and I will just get it for you. Bear with me one moment. Right, so the Line Q's have been not in for that long, but actually been quite impressive. There's quite a lot of responsiveness from them through the shaft, I think. So as a line of shafts, excuse the pun, it's actually there's much more feedback and feel than I potentially expected out of them. But you've got a few players playing them on tour. Ben Griffin in particular, and they do offer a little bit of a differential. So even something like the Tensei that you mentioned there, still a very smooth feeling shaft, but actually there's a bit less kick out of the Tensei white. So sort of preempting a bit, but partly because I've done a bit of testing with this shaft. Just make sure this logs it in there. So there, through the whole red, blue, white profiles, red, you can definitely feel the tip. Blue, very much there's a load of responsiveness through the middle. The white series, so the white in the 6, which I've got here, sits up around the 69, 70 gram mark. So it sits a little on the stronger side for that weight boundary. Design-wise, very stable in the tip. But the one bit in particular that you notice with it is that whilst it's very stable through that bottom half, there's actually a bit of feedback in the top. So that went quite well. So you can actually go potentially into a stiffer flex without losing too much feel through the shaft. So having not really warmed up, I'm not really swinging too quick there, but actually, whilst you know that bottom 2/3 or half in particular is very, very solid, very tight, it's the kind of shaft that gives you a little bit back in that top end. So certainly you can feel the club shaft load a little bit, but it's nice and stable down the tip. Whereas I think Tensei, you don't get quite as much load in the handle. I think that's really where, for me, the Line Q and the white, you get a little bit load in the handle, but then solid bottom half. The Tensei is actually the handling's a little bit more stout. So in the white profile, it's still stable tip, but I think you get a bit less noticeable give in the handle section. But good shaft, some good results with it. Alistair Campbell, evening all. What's your view of the BGT ZNE wedge shafts? What type of golfer do they suit? And a follow-up, if I may, please. Which wedge heads suit a steeper angle of attack and low point control issue? Tensei fat over thin, but both are in my armour, sadly. So ZNE, sort of an interesting one. I get the principle of it in that you've got it's a very stable tip section. Actually, that change in balance where you've got, actually let me grab them just so for those of you that don't know what they are, bear with me. You run to Jasper coming around the corner. So the ZNE, this shaft here, so you've got a wider, thicker grip end section of composite and then to a steel bottom half. So the principle being the stability in that handle end gives you more control, more flight control, more consistency, and then the steel tip for a little bit more feel. One of the things that, certainly in the lighter two weights, 95, 105, 115, is they swing very bottom end heavy. So from a player style point of view, they suit someone who kind of has a little bit of a pull on the handle. They can make the swing weight get quite heavy. So that's probably a thing that most notably, someone who needs weight in the bottom end in particular, they're going to more likely enjoy the ZNE shaft. But that has made them quite particular from a player style point of view. In terms of steeper angle of attack and low point control issues, so there are a couple of ways you can go with this without going to something like the CBZ wedges where they've got a big wide sole. Actually, some of the Clevelands have a bit of a curvature to the sole, so the RTZs in the mid profile, there's a bit of front edge rounding, which stops the leading edge getting too sharp and getting into the turf too much. So they keep a bit of relief on the back edge, but have a bit more camber on the front edge. Alternatively, you've got things like, take a Velcore, you've got the D grind, which has a little bit more steepness with a higher peak on the back edge. So you tend to get steep, that's where you need to play some bounce. But often, if you go full grind, then the back edge, if you play different shots with it, can get in the way. So something like that mid grind from the Clevelands that have that rounding on the sole is back edge relief, or something like a D grind. We do often take a D grind Velcore and just take the peak off. The other one that's worked well, mind you, I guess less so if you're steep, but the T3 wedges from Mizuno, they've got that tri-sole grind, but that probably wouldn't suit you because there's not quite enough bounce on the back edge. But that's where a higher grind Velcore or something like the Clevelands with the front edge protection have done really well for those. TaylorMade, the SC, that's got quite a bit of width, that grind. So there are several out there, but probably that higher base grind of the D grind or that rounded front edge from the Clevelands would be the ones I would orient towards initially. That's just jumped. Right, Berit Noritiazovic. With my high toe miss pattern, will the QI4D's updated vertical roll radius be enough to stabilise my spin window, or should we actively neutralise it by shifting the heavy task weights to the forward toe position? High toe is always going to create a knuckle. There's always going to be gearing around a high toe miss. It's not the best spot on the clubber to miss it, and certainly putting the weight into the toe side isn't actually a bad option. I mean, weight forward, you may actually find, if you're hitting it high, you may actually find you gear off a little bit more spin. So actually shifting the task weight into the toe, that's more likely to stabilize on a high toe a little bit more. So, weight forward in the toe side helps, but forward actually, you're more likely to get a little bit of twisting and gearing around that forward weight position. Back actually stabilizes a touch more on that. So, so the QI4D should help you a little bit, but high toe is always going to create a little bit of a worrying knuckle. So you're working on tee height and distance from the ball. Tee height in particular may well be a good thing for you there. Tractor Boy Dave, evening Simon, great to show as always. Thank you very much indeed. What would be the difference between a Mitsubishi red and blue shaft? So red profiles, whether it's Fujikura with the Ventus range, whether it's Mitsubishi, whether it's UST with the Line Q, they're all using this sort of red, blue, white style, or red, blue, black style progression. And ultimately the red in any of those series is the softest tip, highest launching. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a high launch shaft. Granted, within, I guess, Diamana, take something like the Ventus range, the red profiles have a more responsive tip, but they're not high spin shafts. Ventus red is certainly still a very stable shaft. Within Mitsubishi, the Diamana series, they swing, in the latest Diamanas, they swing a little bit lighter in terms of balance point than the others. There's definitely a little bit more action from the tip, but it's not a high spin shaft. It just helps create a little bit more kick, a little bit more response, a little bit more launch. But whereas blue is very much, in Mitsubishi, is very much about a very, very smooth profile for the shaft. So gradual, stable buck section, stable tip, but a gradual progression of bend through the shaft. Whereas something like the red might actually be a bit more stable in the midsection and then a softer tip. But the blue is the smoothest profile of any of them. A little bit of kick in the mid-launch, mid to low spin, essentially, but you're going to get a bit of response out the middle, stable tip section. Red, more stable midsection, softer tip. Papa B, hello young man. Does it ever make sense to carry 2 clubs with the same loft? I currently have a 21 degree 7 wood and a 3-iron at 21, as a 3-iron, sorry, and a 21 degree 4 hybrid as my 4-iron. Help will be much appreciated. So as long as they're doing enough of a different job. So there are some players that might carry a driving iron and a lofted wood at the same loft because they do totally different jobs. If you're playing a course that has, essentially has long par 3s into wind and then par 5s with bunkers short, well, a lofted wood and a driving iron will not do both jobs on their own. So actually, if your priority is covering off those long game options, then that's when there's a real option to have clubs at the same loft. Between a hybrid and a fairway wood at the same loft, you're unlikely to see that much distance separation, maybe carry-wise you might. So it's not that regular to see it, but if the different head styles give you a definite enough ball flight to make it worth carrying them both, then yeah, why not? I mean, you've got 14 clubs, so you've got the liberty to use all of those 14 if you need them. Probably for a less long hitter, the extra club and the duplication might work in exactly that scenario of whether you find a hybrid or a long iron that's more accurate or better for into wind holes, or you might have certain shots where you'd need that height and elevation stopping power, then have the lofted wood for that. You generally will tend to find that for a longer hitter, you're unlikely to duplicate at that end of the bag. And equally speaking, you're going to load up the bottom end for more armory most of the time going into greens. So it's more likely for a more moderate distance player to have 2 different shots, 2 different ball flights with the same loft. But wouldn't be common, but just wouldn't be common to see that particularly. However, there is potentially a valid option for having it, as long as that, based on the course you're playing, those scenarios come up. Noel, 1988, evening. Simon, do you guys ever build irons to 1/4-inch increments to keep the short irons longer for someone that's taller for a plus length build? The answer is yes. So it depends which end of the bag you want to, say, prioritize. So it might be, in this instance, having longer short irons, but not going too long in the long irons. And whether you end up with standard length progressions from a longer pitch width base and then taper off the lengths at the top end of the set, or whether you have, which would then mean having, I guess, extra length in the long irons, standard progression, and then don't make the long irons too hard to use, or you'd have the longer irons at a standard progression and then shallow off the length progression to the shorter irons. Ultimately, you're probably dictated by what length and swing weight or what build specs you're trying to build to. Does lengthening the long irons make them swing too heavy? Because you're going to be limited by that if you're going over length. There are going to be a few heads that you can use, but normally it's the balance of the club, the swing weight effect by going longer, that is the limiting factor. So quite often it's more a case of, I think you're often going to struggle to taper, to go to small length progressions from too far up the set, i.e. making the short irons longer, simply because your 8-iron, 9-iron pitch wedge could end up like a sledgehammer. So you normally would go the other way of normal length progressions because the head weights permit it, and then taper off the long irons a little bit. However, the answer is yes, it's just what's the best solution for that individual player and the components you're using. Is it keeping the short irons as long as possible, or is it actually shortening the long irons to achieve a more, that's easier to achieve a progressive build in that respect. Hopefully that made sense and I answered that correctly. Golf Nerd 3, what do you think of the new PXG 11 wood? I play G425, 5.7, 9 woods, but sadly they don't make an 11. Any other brands? 11 wood's the only one that I'm aware of, certainly left-handed, the only one I'm aware of is the PXG. There's Callaway have done 11 woods in the past. I think they called it an Ely wood, which ends up at sort of 27 odd degrees. There is more call for it. I mean, certainly getting launch and spin and height versus a long. I mean, the hybrids don't spin it that much, a lot of them now. But in terms of maximizing flight height and stopping power, it's a bit of a surprise there aren't more, but normally like something like the Ping, the 9 wood, you can turn up 1.5 degrees. You can kind of get it closer, but if you're already playing 5, 7 and 9, then yeah, very, very few. So I think Callaway have done it. Off the top of my head, I'd have to double check whether this range has one. But there are very few. And actually, it's not bad at all. The PXG woods are pretty solid. It's just a slightly, sometimes at that loft, they can look a little strange because of the leading edge progression to see that, to get that much loft on the head. So that's where sometimes, something like a GT1 Titleist hybrid, it's almost like a small fairway wood. That can be a good option to make it look a little less odd. But very few, but I think we'll see more in the coming years, I would say. EDR Performance, Simon, love these, thank you very much. Love my Diamana Whiteboard 73X, indoor sim when 109, 113, but on course when 90%, 105 to 109, I feel I lose feel. Should I go to a Whiteboard 73 stiff, or what similar shaft is a bit more forgiving when 80%? So it's not really about how forgiving the shaft is at 80%. It's actually more a case of when you're in the sim and going 10-0 at it, is that then what's making that shaft weight work? Because ultimately, taking a few miles an hour off isn't going to make a shaft not load and kick and actually work for you. It's such a small percentage change. It's actually just when you rein it back a bit on course, is that 72 gram, 73 gram dead weight too heavy for you? And you've got to go full bore at it to get the timing of the club to work. So it may well be actually taking a little look at looking at shaft weight and dropping that by a few grams helps you to get the best out of it on course. The stiff flex to the X, probably not going to make enough of a difference. You get a bit more feel out of the shaft, but it might be they need to go from 72, 73 grams to more like 70. Whiteboard has a bit of a slightly lower mid balance, not actually quite as tip balanced as the Line Q is. But if you're looking at something kind of 70 odd grams, 70, 71 grams, the Line Q might be worth a little look. In the 6X in the white, keeps that white profile going. Something like actually the VA Composites, the Badass Gold 71, probably a little more tip heavy than the Whiteboard and may not feel quite as smooth, but that would certainly be an option. Otherwise, it's 70 grams on the nose. Probably changing profile too much for some of them. If you want a Whiteboard profile, then some of them actually drop off a little bit more than that. Maybe that Line Q might be worth a go, but I would say it's probably more the weight rather than the stiffness. A softer flex might feel more responsive, but actually isn't really going to change the data too much. If it's the same weight or 1 gram difference, essentially you're still swinging the same club, and that's where the timing's like to be going off. So maybe look at something in that 69 to 71 gram range rather than 73. Sounds like a tiny difference, but actually means you're not having to go at it to get the best out of it, and that probably suits the on-course swing a little bit better. L. Bieniek 11, hello Simon, how do you compare the Whiteboard 63X, Ventus Black 6X and AD VF 6X? Recently got the GTS3 and the VF, having used the Ventus Black in the past, and it just felt very smooth compared. So relative to first gen Ventus Black, which I'm assuming that's the one you used, that could get quite hard feeling. I mean, the VF is actually not a particularly responsive shaft. They really amped that up for a more kind of tour style profile, where graphite designs in the past have always been a little bit more responsive. So potentially, the original Ventus Black did. They both swing pretty tip heavy. The dead weights are actually pretty similar. So potentially the VF is just a little bit less hard in the handle end, which is where you're maybe getting a bit more responsiveness from it. But I would say original Ventus Black and that were pretty interchangeable. Second gen, the Velcore Plus is a much smoother shaft, much softer feeling, sits a couple of grams lighter, much less rigid in terms of structure. So that you'll definitely notice some responsiveness from. And the Whiteboard 63X, that's a lot lighter. So you're down at 63, 64 grams. That's going to swing much lighter. It's still very stable in the tip section. Going to get, again, a little bit more play out of the handle end on that. Those heavier shafts are going to feel a bit more stout. So, but you're likely to lose timing with that versus your VF if your VF's going well. So keep it in that upper 60s, close to 70. Again, you've got things like the Line Q. That's another one that's going to feel more responsive again. But it sounds like you've got the VF in a good window for you there. Sweating Merlot 5415, how are you? Howdy. Could you compare the Ventus Velcore Plus Red 6X with the Blue 6X in a GTS3 10-degree head, please? Want to know the main differences. I'll just go and get those shafts for you now. Right. Get my steps in this week without someone else on. Oh, that's got the different, is that the same length? Yeah, it's got just got a different tip. I'll put the blue, do the blue first. We've got this. There's a couple of tips being switched around, and the red hasn't quite been done yet. So I think one of the things to point out with the current range of the Ventuses, they're definitely smoother than the first gen. You know, the red, all of them used to swing a little bit more tip heavy and definitely feel a little bit more stout. So even in the X-Flexes, they're not as hard a feeling as they used to be. So much more approachable, I would say. It's almost like the TRs first gen were a little higher balance because of the weave in the butt section. And then the standard Ventuses were a little more tip heavy. They've definitely reversed that this year. The TRs are a little bit more tip end stout and balance wise, and these swing a little smoother. So the blue 6X, we know how stable the tip section is in the blue, so you get lots of rigidity down at contact, not too harsh in the middle of the shaft, but you can see that keeps that flight down. Now, because I play more loft, I've actually lofted this down a hair, so I play less loft, sorry, so just to make sure it doesn't balloon up too much. But you know, it's almost a less, some players might say there's a less crisp feel in this series than the first ones, but it actually makes them, say, a bit more approachable, a bit more user-friendly. But very stable down the tip section. Little bit of sensation through the shaft, but yeah, very, very stable through impact. That Velcore material really tightens it up down the tip end. And I say, even with the red profiles, whilst they are the most tip responsive, they're not tip soft. Not exactly high spin. But I will pop that one in. So I'll switch this out in a moment. Right. So, Velcore plus red 6X. So I say red profile, you see quite a lot of the tour players using the red profiles this year, whether it's in this or the TR. Again, because going back to what I was saying, they're not a soft, flippy profile. It's still a very stable profile. And actually, a lot of the heads and the players now are quite low spin in their own right. So actually wanted to keep a bit of flight onto this. So you know, there is definitely a little bit more play in that lower section, but it's not a weak, the handle end's not weak at all. So comparing to the blue, so it's not like there's that much more kick in the bottom end. You know, I caught that a little, just turned that over a little bit more. I think the red swings proportionally the easiest, maybe compared to the first gen, but it's not exactly a soft, kicky shaft. And really, it's about kind of timing and numbers. You know, does this, so launch angle's up a little bit, and there's a little bit more play through that bottom half. So the launch angle proportionally is up a little bit, but it's not spinny. So ultimately, if you're looking to retain just a little bit more launch, but the stability of the Velcore, the red is still a great shaft. Blue just brings it down a little bit more in terms of launch angle, but actually neither is a high spin shaft, and they can both stand up to a lot of stick, which I think is where, say, we're seeing a lot of the reds on tour. You know, someone like Min Woo has played it, you know, Tyrrell Hatton's played it. There are quite a lot of those in play on tour, more than you might think because of the way it bends. Where has my sanity gone? Evening, gents. I currently use Zelos 7 reg shafts with my M15s. Very nice heads. Whilst I like the feel and the kick at the bottom of the Zelos, looking at Zelos 8 for heavier feel and help to kill hooks. The heavier weight might actually not help with that. So See, if your Zelos 7s are too light and you're overpowering and flipping them over a little bit, then yes, potentially the Zelos 8 will help that. Still incredibly smooth shaft. And I think when you're going into lightweight steel, Nippon are, quality-wise, they are the benchmark. I don't think any other brand has produced as many and within the tighter tolerances that they make of those sort of sub 100 gram steels. So you were in very, very good hands staying with a lightweight Nippon steel. Still going to be very smooth feel. You're going to lose a little bit of that kick where there's a little bit more material in the shaft, a bit more metal there, so it's going to feel a little bit more stable. But I think ultimately from a timing point of view, if the weight suits you better, it just means everything's going to arrive at impact a little bit more and give you a bit more to hit against. Sometimes going heavier creates more of a hook. So if you can give them a test out first before making that switch, that's great. But great quality shafts, and you will keep as much feel as possible out of a steel at that weight as any shaft out there. Mark, let's just jump to it. Mark Wright, evening. I never normally make it home in time to join the live, so hello, good evening. I'd love to get into the industry after a decade of doing something completely unrelated. Any tips on where to start? So, interesting one. I think it depends on which part of the industry and what you want to do. I mean, there are, coaching-wise, there are some routes you can go through. Obviously, there's a PGA route. From a club building side of it, Diamond Golf do some courses where you can learn the club making, club building, club fitting basics. But it is very much an experience-led industry. Certainly the fitting and coaching side of it, you have to have seen a lot of things to know how to deal with them, and ultimately you can never have seen everything. But it's not the easiest industry to get into purely because of that. So you can go through all your coaching qualifications, but golfers move differently because of different impingements and historical sports you've played, habits, and that one theory with one player won't work with another. So I think getting to, it depends which bit you're thinking about getting into. But there are actually relatively limited routes. From our point of view, we'd love to be able to do more within that in terms of helping, whether it's an apprenticeship or anything along those lines, work experience. But ultimately for us, we're still a very small team, and actually, to come and do a week's work experience, actually there's not a lot of value for either side because someone can't get into the nitty gritty of it. When we take on a fitter, we train them for 2 months before we actually let them loose in the bay. So there's a lot of shadowing, a lot of sort of gradual progression through from watching to being involved to being watched before someone's actually then let loose with clients on their own in the bay. So it is a challenge, but let us know which bit you're looking at, and I might be able to help a little bit more. But yeah, there aren't that many easy routes in. There are some courses, some university courses that do sort of golf studies or golf management. There's the PGA course in Birmingham. There are some golf colleges, but some are a little bit more geared towards playing. So yeah, it's not the simplest one to get into, sadly. But because a lot of businesses like ours are actually relatively small, we don't have the opportunities that the big corporations might. But actually maybe doing a bit of work experience or doing a bit of work with one of the companies in some shape or form, you might be able to then find a way through to find something that you enjoy and are good at. So. Richard Galfin, I love the show. Thoughts on the IDI driving? I've already done that one. That one cropped up from earlier on. Pay No Swing. Simon, I think that my dad's a fitting marked on Saturday with Tom. Do you know what time it is, as I don't have a way of contacting him now to ask? So it is 9:45. James, check that out for me whilst I was on there. Greg Sweet, 419. Hi again. I play GT3 driver with Tensei Blue 55 stiff, swing between 98 and 103. Spin never gets above 2000, but smash factor is between 145 and 151. Should I stick with this? Love the show. Well, your smash is good. Spin's in a strong window as long as you've got enough launch. Ultimately, it sounds like it's performing pretty solidly. As to is it optimal, I honestly couldn't say. There'd have to be either consistent gain in ball speed, or if your launch angle's fairly low, at sort of 98, 103 miles an hour, you could probably get away with, depending on where you play, 11 to 12 in terms of launch angle. Ideally more like a 14 to maximize carry as well as run out with that sort of spin. Maybe a little bit higher, depends what your angle of attack. There are lots of other parameters that would tell me how well your club's working. So if you trust it, if you're consistent with it, if you're comfortable with it, great. GT3 is a great head, and one generation on, you're not necessarily going to see, we're not seeing a lot of people who are in a GT switching to GTS unless that moving the weight back helps to manage spin, because GT was fast. So I'd say if it's performing well and you trust it and like it and get on well with it, then you're likely to see only minimal difference unless your flight window's in the wrong place. Little Big 73, any way you can describe the differences between the graphite design ADIZ versus DM on a whiteboard? Pretty different. Maybe test both in fairways if time permits. Also thoughts on mini driver as a driver replacement. So mini driver as a driver replacement, actually we don't do very often. It's normally if someone's hits down it a lot and the smaller head manages spin. Often we're using mini driver for someone who's got loads of speed who doesn't use a fairway wood, and it's more of a strategy call off the tee. But if you're someone who traps the ball quite a lot, the mini driver affords a little bit of loft to get the ball airborne, but the smaller head can help keep the spin in check. So that's when we'd use it as a driver replacement, possibly to shorten shaft length, but it's normally an angle of attack basis that we'd use it as a driver replacement. IZ versus DM on a whiteboard, really different profiles. I want to get through all the questions I can before we finish, so I won't hit that unless I have time at the end. IZ is so in the 6 is a 64 gram, mid-launch, softish tip, designed with a bit of kick. Actually, it makes it quite a good fairway shaft because it has a little bit of tip response. So in the 70, it's a 72 gram. Worked really well in fairways for us, actually. Whiteboard in the 70 is a similar weight, slightly lighter in the 6, but it's much, much more tip stout. So it's going to swing a little more tip heavy, but it's going to feel a lot firmer through the ball. So if you're someone who wants to hit at it and have that crispness and stability, whiteboard will give you that. IZ will, in theory, give you a little bit more flight, but will feel much more responsive. So you may feel an easier fairway shaft. Little Bigs, thanks. Lee Roberts, hey guys, keep up the good work. Thank you very much. Wanted to put a black shaft in my SC Fastback 1.5 Terillium just for looks. Very pretty. Few people online say that you need a 390 tip. This seems very hard to come by. Is this true? Yeah, it's a real pain in the arse for some of the Scotty putters in that, excuse my French, in that the tip diameter is wide. 390 is often where they sit, and it makes them very awkward to get shafts for, particularly a black shaft. So you can get them, we certainly have been able to get them from Scotty in the past, but you normally have to send them off to be done. So you may be able to do it via the Scotty website. Certainly over here, depending on where you're based, UK may be able to do that for you now. But yeah, that can be a real ball ache getting that done. It's a real shame because actually it's something that there are definitely people out there who would do it, but it's just not very easy to find one of those shafts. But I would contact Titleist direct. You could, as James said, you could put there are some shaft skins that you can put on, but they're going to be matte, so rather than gloss. So depending if it's a gloss shaft, then contact Titleist directly on that, and that would be your best bet to help out, I would say. Algoff123 had a comment on the other stream, but I don't think it's been read out. We'll repeat. Alta CB 55 stiff snapped the day before I was due to play around. Lovely. The only shaft I could find at short notice was the Project X 60 LZ San Diego stiff. Okay, that's an old school one. How different are these two? Pretty different. So the LZ profile was one of the kind of the handcrafted. There were some stock versions that were used in Callaways for a while, but there was an aftermarket one. And actually the 60, the Project X 60, LZ stands for loading zone, but essentially there's a little bit of response in the tip section, but it was structurally a lot more stable. So a little bit heavier. I think that sat at around 62, 63 grams. But the CB55 stiff is a much softer profile, higher balance point. Ping put actually a little plug in the butt end of it. It's going to be a much more responsive feeling shaft, and the balance sit a little higher up towards the grip, whereas the Project X is going to swing a little bit more bottom heavy and play more stout. So pretty different, I'm afraid, on those ones. And it's always just before a game, isn't it? It's never when you've got time to replace it. But there should be plenty of places that you can get one from should you need to. So it shouldn't be difficult to replace should you want to. Martin Williams, could you hit a ping 440k 9 loft in a Ventus White 40 stiff, please? And what's your thoughts? I'm going to crack through a couple of questions, and I will come back and hit that. Lee Roberts said, thanks. Philly Central, evening, Simon. I see lots of aftermarket shaft options when speccing a new driver. However, are these 250 plus options really worth it for the average player over stock? Thoughts? Ultimately, the answer is yes, they can be. You know, an average player can still have a lot of speed. An average player can still benefit from the higher grade materials that these shafts have. But ultimately, you should never buy them just randomly off spec because you have no idea whether they're going to work or not. So it's why one of the things that we will always make sure we do is validate whether something is genuinely better or not. So if it works, it's going to be the right weight and the right balance and let you just move naturally, which lets you time the swing as naturally as possible, which then gives you consistent results. A higher grade material will feel a bit smoother because there's more graphite to resin, and resin makes it can kind of harden it up, and you lose that sense of load through the shaft. You get stability without the hardness on a higher grade material a lot of the time. But ultimately, if a stock shaft swings best for you, that's still the best option. It's just that there are limitations to what they can offer in terms of stock. So higher grade means tighter tolerances, means better quality materials used, and it means they can do more with the bend profiles and the feels of the shafts. There are an awful lot that are only, as you say, 250 plus, but they have to work, they have to produce results, and you have to deem it value. You know, is there enough benefit and performance? Are the numbers better enough for you to feel that it's worth purchasing? But making sure dynamically you've tested it, that's massively important. Otherwise, you're just going in blind, and that's rarely ever worth it. First cut, do you fit much of the Blueprint S, or is I240 the more widely used ping iron? Don't seem to hear much of Blueprint S in the YouTube space. No, I think I240 is the more widely used because it's more forgiving. It's a bit more rounded in terms of performance. Blueprint S is essentially like a Titleist CB, or some of the old Mizuno, like an S3 style club. It's a bit of forgiveness, but there's not an awful lot. And so actually performance, you get progression of performance, face tech with the I240. So for the majority of golfers out there, it's a more applicable head. Blueprint S is a nicely made head. For what it is, they're quite dear because Ping don't do a lot of forging. So actually for them, the unit cost is higher. And it's quite a dear product. It's nicely made, but 240 is more mainstream, more players are going to suit it. You still see a lot of tour players playing it, but that's probably why it just suits more players. It's more likely to be used by more golfers, therefore you see it more in the YouTube space, I would say. Blueprint S are good, but we don't fit an awful lot of them, no. Do you have the DG Gold Plano swings? Do you have the DG Gold Mid 115 S300 shaft, and then the Nippon Modus 3105 in stiff? We do. Would it be possible to try them in the 770 and say pros and cons of both? Pros and cons of both. Modus 105 has a softer, I don't actually need to hit it to tell you this. Modus 105 stiff might launch it slightly higher, but the Modus has a softer handle and stable tip. So it's a few grams lighter. The Modus 105 stiff sits at about 106, 107 grams, whereas the Dynamic Gold Mid 115 is up at 115. Both swing a bit more on the bottom end, but the Modus has a tip stable profile, so in theory tighter dispersion, whereas the Dynamic Gold Mid uses the tip to kick a bit more, but there's a big difference in weight, so one will just time better for you. Both good shafts though, but the Modus will feel a bit more responsive. Edwin Lambley, good evening Simon, another shaft question. Noticed a guy I played with has the Shimada S-Lite shafts. Are they specialist aftermarket, and who are they for? Thanks for doing these every week. So Shimada, really great quality, again, Japanese made, really top quality shafts. They actually are the factory where the Oben steels are made out of. Oben partner with Shimada from a steel production point of view. So really good tolerance, really good quality. The S-Lite are the taper tip version of the, there's the Slite? No, the S-Lite are a parallel shaft. The Shimada Constants were the taper tip version of the S-Lites. So the S-Lites sit at around the 95 gram mark, 90 to 100 gram. So actually the S-Lite being parallel around the 92, 93 gram mark. Quite responsive feeling, but tended not to kick spin up too much. So are they aftermarket? Yes. Not the cheapest shafts in the world, but great tolerance. The S-Lites are designed for moderate speed, keep a bit of kick, get a bit of launch. But actually, we always felt Shimada kept the spin down a little bit but that whole line of shafts is being completely redone. You won't find them anywhere anymore. They've gone out of production, but there are shaft launches coming from Shimada. So if you liked those, keep an eye out for that. Very quickly, Pano swings, what iron would be replaced by an 11 wood? Depending on the brand, it's a 27-degree loft. So you're either looking at old school traditional lofts, you're looking at a 5 iron. A lot of clubs now you're looking at a 6 iron, but probably 5 iron because you're going to get more speed on the 11 wood. Probably a 5 iron for most brands. Just want to say this is the highlight of my Monday, and lovely, Simon. Keep up the hard work, mate. Thank you very much. That means an awful lot, and we're glad that you guys just are here to enjoy them and do enjoy them. We enjoy all the questions. It makes the Monday nights go a little bit quicker. But yeah, as long as you guys are enjoying it, we'll keep doing it. But really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm conscious I've got to go back and hit that 440K with the Ventus White. I will do that very shortly. Sally Saad, hello gents, looking to get a new 3 and 5 woods. Is it a good idea to use the same shaft in my driver? Currently using a graphite design Tor AD DI5 stiff. Not necessarily. Quite often you go to a more tip responsive shaft in the fairway because the heads are smaller. So a driver uses something like the DI has a stable tip section. So that actually you want the driver shaft to kind of hang onto the head a bit more, because if you think the size of the head, any mishit on the driver creates a little bit more distortion, and that puts a higher torsion on the shaft. So a more stable shaft in the driver tends to hold onto that face a bit more, and that bigger head tends to get a little bit more feedback out of it. The smaller head on the fairway is looking for a little bit of launch and spin, but actually if you're using it as a fairway wood off the ground, you will often go to a more tip responsive profile in a fairway wood. So normally you'd go a little heavier in the fairways to the drivers because they're shorter. So there are some different parameters and different characteristics we'd look for from a fairway wood shaft to a driver shaft. So any fairway specific shafts tend to be designed with a more tip responsive profile. So, so a few layers to that, but ultimately, no, we often do use a different shaft in the fairway to driver. Edar Performance, thanks Simon. I do have a lighter whiteboard and Tensei Pro 1K white 6X. Might have to try the lighter weight. How do the whiteboard and the 1K Pro white compare? Best live channel out there, 7,000 miles away. Thank you very much. Well, 7,000 miles, even that goes further than the Proclaimers. Thank you for watching. Whiteboard, 1K Pro, again, the white profiles they're basically, this is one of our critiques to Mitsubishi, is that the lines overlap a little bit too much. The 1K Pro white sits at similar dead weight. The Diamond has always been based around smooth feel. And then the Tensei, they're using some different materials. So I don't think the Tensei feels quite as solid as the Diamond whiteboard. Whiteboard has always had that little bit of hardness to it. Tensei a little bit smoother. They're really quite similar. I think the Tensei's a slightly smoother feel. So the extra stoutness of the whiteboard might feel a little bit more controlled. Whereas the 1K white likely to feel a little bit more play through the shaft. But yeah, I think my only critique for Mitsubishi, which they know because I saw them a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, is the Tensei and the Diamond overlap a little bit too much, and I think that will be rectified in the coming launches. But yeah, thank you for your comments as well. Mark Wright, thanks for that. I get exactly where you're coming from. I was looking towards the fitting side gear as it's where my interest lies. I'll have a butcher's for some courses, etc. Thanks. Yeah, certainly for that side. Diamond Golf, that's a good baseline course. Gets you kind of doing some of it, but actually anything you can do to kind of get a little bit of hands-on experience somewhere, and that is going to help massively. But that Diamond Golf course is a very good one. I'll do Nicholas's question, then I'll hit that shot. Nicholas Skirnet 4276, hope I pronounced that right. Can you talk about the Accra Ice Steel Green 125 shafts? I can't find a ton of info on the shaft, but recently picked them up in a used set of irons, and they're amazing. Trying to find out more. So they used to, depending on which one you've got, they originally launched with an eco-friendly, a non-chrome finish. And then when COVID hit, anything non-chrome became really dear and very hard to do, so they went back to being chrome. But ultimately, the 125 is a pretty stout shaft. They swing quite tip heavy, and they're not overly low spin in the design. The red profile is more of that. But they tend to swing relatively heavy, have a bit of smoothness through the upper section, little bit of kick out the tip section. So they're kind of more of a, mid-flight profile in terms of design, but they play quite strong. They play pretty sturdy, but they are very, very rare to find. There aren't many places that will have them. Accra have always been very specialist and only operated through fitters and builders. They want the tightest tolerances. They want to work with the best people out there. They don't just want they're not just looking for volume. So that's why you won't find them too much. They have just changed their website, and actually there is less info on that than there used to be. But ultimately, yeah, very stable. If you've got the chrome, the polished chrome finish ones, then they're a little harder feeling because of that chroming than the old eco finish. But very, very stable and swing a little heavier than something like into the bottom end than something like a dynamic gold. Have a bit more stability and solidity to feel, but not quite as hard as a Project X. The principle, it kind of melds a bit of both. But really good shafts. So I'm going to get that that 440K and Ventus White, give that a hit, and we'll check it out from there. So the Velcore White actually been a really, really good addition to the lineup. So I think the one thing, the white profile, all of the, or it only has the one weight option, which sits just a fraction under 50 grams, 49.5 grams. Relative to other shafts at this weight, it's definitely one of the more stout, more sturdy feeling. Again, balance-wise, sits a little more towards the bottom end. A lot of the shafts in this sort of weight category tend to swing a little bit lighter and move the balance up the shaft a bit, but the Velcore White definitely keeps a decent bit of solidity in the bottom end, a decent bit of mass in the bottom end. Let's find the right weight for this. So it's certainly something where for any of these sort of 50-odd gram lighter weight versions, this has a bit of guts to it. Certainly something that relative to that weight is going to feel a bit more solid and feel like there's a bit more to kind of hit with. It's not a kind of a soft, flippy, lightweight shaft. So that's where it's actually done really well. You can get down into the lighter weights, but you've still got the Velcore material. So with the 440K, you've got a load of stability, lots of weight to the back, lots of forgiveness. But then you've then got a lighter shaft weight. And for someone who suits that lighter shaft weight, you've got structural rigidity with the Velcore Plus, a load of off-center performance with the 440K. So in theory, it kind of means that, sore shoulder, don't get old, everyone. In theory, it means you might be able to generate more speed, but keep a lot of stability and control. So if I start off with this. So because it's lighter, you're going to feel the shaft give and load. There's a little less hardness through this section of the shaft simply because there's less material than the heavier options. But the Velcore Plus keeps that tip section nice and solid and stable. So, that for me, I've got a 14 launch, but it's a sub 2000 spin. It's not something that's just going to kind of float off up into the air. You've got from this shaft something that it's been very good at keeping that flight down forwards a little bit more relative to the lighter weights. So yes, you get some loading and feedback from the top half, but we've got that a little bit more heel side, but 2.5 on spin. That's not for a shaft of this weight and for kind of a mid-spin head. There's lots of stability there. So if you want something that's lightweight but has some rigidity in it, that is a great option for you. And if you want some protection against a cross-face performance, that is a great head. So something that potentially, if you're looking for lightweight and stable and forgiving, not going to go too wrong with that, except it's going to be very dear. You've got a deer head, which the RRP sits in the UK up over 600 pounds, and then you've got a 350 odd pound shaft. So you're pushing £1,000 for a driver, which is not insignificant. So it better get you a good 10 yards or so. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. Obviously we started a bit late, so we let that run over a bit. Have a very enjoyable weekend watching US Open. I'm certainly for one going to be glued to that for most of it, and hopefully I can stay up long enough on Sunday night to watch the finish. But have a great week. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the lovely comments and the questions. And we'll see if I can get someone to join me next week. I'm working on that one, and we'll let you know as soon as we can. But thanks for joining us. Have a great week. See you next Monday.